this is a funny one. You know, Russell likes to do more pop culture stuff. I'm more of a curmudgeonly old dad nowadays. I don't really like to dabble in this too much, but I found this one to be genuinely funny. And those of you guys who know my sense of humor, you know that sometimes I can have a dark and twisted sense of humor, but I also have an innocent sense of humor at times. And this kind of falls in the latter camp because some clips have surfaced that are actually quite old. Not all of these are brand new, but they've surfaced online recently on social media about the upcoming live-action Snow White remake. These clips feature Rachel Zegler, who plays the title character in the film, which is just called Snow White, not Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which we'll get to in a few moments. Yeah. Right. But Rachel Zegler plays the title character, and then Gal Gadot, who plays the evil queen in the upcoming film scheduled for a March 2024 release. I'm surprised RFK hasn't spoken out against this since they cast an Israeli as the evil queen. That's some anti-Semitism right there. That's, you ask me. You ask me. I mean, this talks about being a woke project. I don't know. That doesn't sound all that woke to me. But here are the two stars of the film going on a press tour. What I love about this is kind of a press tour for the movie. I mean, it's not the official press tour, but they're obviously, appearing at events, talking up the film.
Yeah.
And they seem to be...
or talking it down.
Right. That's what's so funny about this, is that they seem to be sort of trashing the film, the source material, even the ride at Disney World inspired by the source material.
Yes. Okay. So as you can imagine, I have wanted to cover this, but I try to pick the things I'm going to torture Keaton with. So imagine my surprise when it was Keaton's idea to cover this.
Well, this is just funny. I mean, I think it's funny.
I have plenty to say about this, but we will get into it.
Yeah, but Russell's going to be a grumpy bastard about it. I'm kind of being a little more
joyful.
He's a
happy warrior.
I'm a happy warrior. I like this girl. I like this Rachel Zegler. I know she's getting a lot of hate. I like it. She's a bubbly young woman who's clearly having the time of her life doing inverse promotion of a film that she probably got paid very well to be in. She's a kid. I don't know. Does she not realize, like, hey, you're actually talking. You're actually running the film into the ground.
I agree with you that she's young and she shouldn't be getting that kind of hate, particularly given that. How do you think the people around her talk about this film? These are people who hated, and we'll get into this. These are people who hate Snow White so much that they won't do Snow White. They're just kind of hijacking the name of Snow White. They changed everything about it. So how do you think they talk about Snow White in front of her? How do you think the writers talk about it? How do you think the directors talk about it? How many of these ideas are her ideas? That having been said, yeah, does she read your... Look, man, I don't know how you're getting that. Does she read like a really off-puttingly pretentious Gen Zer going on with her woke nonsense with absolute, it's the pompous narcissistic actor, like nobody ever told her to shut the fuck up.
All right, well, let's let the audience be the judge. Let's take a look.
In 1937, and very evident. The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time. Cast a guy in the movie.
Yeah,
Andrew
I don't know where
Burnett,
you're coming
great
from,
dude. All
Kate.
of Andrew's scenes could get cut.
She
Who knows?
could
It's
not be
Hollywood,
more
baby.
cringe.
I'm gonna stand there 18 hours.
I don't think she's cringe. I think it's...
You represent like 0.02% of people in
I was
America
scared of the
I
who
original
do not
cartoon.
think that
I
was
watched
cringe.
it once and then I
I
never
like her.
picked it up again. Like, I'm being so serious. I watched it once and then I went on the ride in Disney World, which was called Snow White's Scary Adventures. Doesn't sound like something a little kid would like. Was terrified of it. Never revisited Snow White again. So I watched it for the first time in probably 16, 17 years. when I was doing this film. It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be
yeah.
saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's
Oh,
not going to
thank
be
God.
dreaming about true love.
Thank
She's
God.
dreaming about becoming the leader she knows
God
she can
forbid.
be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. Reality is that the cartoon was made 85 years ago. It's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power and what a woman
like
is
it's
fit for
nothing
in
good
the
to
world.
say
So when
about
we
the
came
material.
to reimagining the actual role, Snow White has to learn a lot of lessons about coming into her own power before she can come into power over a kingdom.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's the proactive one, and she's the one who set the terms, is what makes it so relevant to where we are today.
Yeah,
yeah.
no, absolutely.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
All right.
Now, the thing about it is, so Snow White came out in 1937, but as I remember, I mean, I haven't watched the movie in ages. I think I watched it when I was a tiny little kid. You know, I had my favorite Disney movies when I was a little kid, and Snow White was not one of them. But I know, like, my kids now, they like Lady and the Tramp, you know, because they're big dog lovers and stuff like that. And so when you watch Lady and the Tramp now on Disney Plus, a little card comes on in front of Lady and the Tramp saying that this contains some problematic stereotypes or like depictions, and they're referring to the
I mean,
Siamese.
I haven't seen it in so long. I can't. Oh,
Well-
the Siamese cats.
Well, I
Is that
told my
what it
wife,
is?
I said, are they talking about the guys with at the restaurant, the Italian guys with the accordion? Because that's not a stereotype. That's endearing. No, but they're talking about the Siamese cats have like these
Right.
like
Yeah,
very
yeah.
exaggerated Asian accents and stuff like that.
Right,
So that's what
right,
they're talking
right.
about. I don't believe they have a title card like that in front of Snow White. Like there's certain material that we would look back on and say, okay, that's
Song of the
problematic in a
South,
modern context, Song of the South. But like, you know, like the Amos and Andy radio
of
shows where you
course,
had
yeah.
white people doing, you know,
Yeah,
racist
yeah.
impersonation of black people. Like that's something that we realize, okay, not only would we not do that today, we kind of look back and say they really shouldn't have done that back then either. Right. So like doing an exaggerated, you know, Chinese accent on a Siamese cats, that yes, we wouldn't do that today. And we kind of look back and say, okay, they shouldn't have done it then either. Snow White, I don't think there's anything in there like that. I mean, I don't remember
No,
the
there
thing,
isn't.
but it's just what is it?
well-
A Northern European folktale, something like
it's
that.
it's a German folktale.
German, okay.
Okay, so I agree. As I say, she's a kid. She's 22 years old. Like to go and bully and really hold her responsible for everything she says. It's cruel. However,
She's also having fun. Like she's smiling. She's making weird, funny faces. Like she's not like one of these doctrinaire college snobs who's like out there on a soapbox lecturing people. She's like the ride is scary.
Well,
and
but
it's
that's
old.
yeah, that's exactly what she is. And why you don't see that, I have no idea. I mean, that's a big part of why people are reacting to her so negatively. She is very much that, but I'm also saying she's 22, and I'm sure she's surrounded by people like that. She's in fucking Hollywood. So, you know, for example, the reason Henry Cavill left The Witcher, which, you know, the writing team just completely drove into the ground, is because they hated the source material. The writers would make fun of The Witcher and talk about how much they hated The Witcher. Hollywood has been overrun by these people who have been very indoctrinated with, you know, the general panoply of identity politics and theory. And they see their job not as entertaining people, but to basically deconstruct all of these beloved myths. So that brings us to Snow White, which in my opinion, I feel like we've hit the high watermark with woke. When you look at everything that's going on around this movie, I think history will remember this as the moment when the wave broke and began to roll back. Because all the contradictions inherent in these ideas are tied up in this disaster of a project as it's evolving to be. There's actually talk of Disney trying to quietly cancel it or only release it on Disney Plus because the last thing they need is more damage to their reputation than they've already taken over the last couple of years, and particularly this year. Okay, so overall, every culture's folktales idealize the standards of beauty of the people who lived there. right? I mean, you're not going to read an African folktale that talks about paleness as an ideal of aesthetics, right? It's going to be black as onyx. She was beautiful because her skin was black. Like, that's what you're going to have. Every culture produces stories like that. So you have a story here where the character's beauty is based in European racial characteristics. She is white as snow, right? This was an ideal at the time, and that's
fairest
also,
of them all, or is that Sleeping Beauty is the fairest of them all? Mirror, mirror, that's Sleeping Beauty,
no,
right?
that's Snow White. I think
It
that's
is?
Snow White. Yeah, mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest of
Who's
them
the
all?
fairest?
It's,
Makes
it's
sense.
Snow
That would
White.
be Snow White. Yeah.
Okay, and that was also a class thing, because if you were pale in that time, it meant you didn't have to work outdoors.
Right, you were inside. Right.
So it was also, and you have that, as I recall, going on in Snow White, and this is common in fairy tales, that they are of noble blood. So even if they're raised by peasants, it still comes through. They're like the aristocracy. They're like the nobility. But every culture produces stories like this. And of course, every culture has ideals of beauty based on their characteristics, right? There's nothing unusual about that. Now, I can understand why, if you are from a culture that was victimized by the people from the culture that has that aesthetic ideal, you would find that aesthetic ideal distasteful or oppressive, because these are the people who came in and invaded your culture. Now, this is another point that I will make. The idea that Europe is unique in having conquered other cultures or brutalized other cultures or enslaved other peoples, that's simply not true. Any culture until the modern era that grew of sufficient size and material resources committed atrocities. The Arab slave trade was actually the longest lasting slave trade in the world. That went from 600 AD down into the 1960s, and it still operates underground even today. But I can understand if, well, people who were taken by the Arabs, do they want to hear stories about Arab ideals of beauty? Sure. But then you don't do Snow White. It's literally called Snow White. There is no getting around what the story is predicated on. Now, if you find that offensive, which I'm not even taking that on, I understand that, don't do it. Why would you do it? What is the point of doing it? And then, with the dwarfs, this is where the whole thing just kind of completely hits the wall. As many they were going to cast dwarfs, apparently. And then Peter Dinklage decided that he's, as some dwarf said in response, who made him king, he decided that the dwarves in Snow White were offensive. He said, well, you got dwarves living in a cave. What the fuck is that? And, it's horrible. And as a result, they came up with, we have an image of this. This
Tall people.
Yeah, this made the rounds. So now they're the 7 magical creatures. Or as some people have said, the 7 Starbucks baristas. And
it's not called 7 Magic. It's just called Snow White is the name of it.
Now it's just called Snow White. So you have had a lot of dwarf actors come out and say, hey, Peter Dinklage was perfectly happy to play an elf in Elf before he was famous enough from Game of Thrones that he could actually get cast in roles that are not about being a dwarf, where you're just an actor. But we don't have those opportunities, most of us. And now you've denied us 6 roles that could have gone to dwarf actors. Like, who decided, because Peter Dinklage is offended by it, that all of a sudden nobody can be in this project in a community that's very difficult to get work? And also, what was negative about the portrayal of the 7 dwarfs? The 7 dwarfs were pretty positive characters overall.
People liked them. They were probably Happy Meal toys at one point,
Well, I'm sure they were.
Yeah.
So if you look at all, so at first this picture came out, it was so damaging that Disney denied it was a real picture. And then they wound up having to admit it was a real picture, but 2 of the actors are stand-ins. These were post-production promotional photos. So if you're going to do Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but she can't be white and they can't be dwarfs, what the fuck are you doing? If you really believe that Snow White is this racist, horrible, retrograde, anti-dwarf story, do something else, man. There is a whole planet full of folklore, mythology. What better way to make the point that we're moving past these white standards and this Eurocentric viewpoint than to produce a movie based on African mythology and folklore, or Latin or Asian? Like, why go to do Snow White? And that is why people find her interviews so obnoxious, because she is reflecting, and that's why I say I don't think she's to blame. She's reflecting the whole creative point of view that she's probably hearing from the writers and directors. They're not out to make Snow White. They're out to deconstruct Snow White. They're out to refute Snow White. They're out to destroy Snow White. So when you have made it very clear that you fucking hate it, and she is just being the voice of that overall point of view of the production, when you're making it very clear you fucking hate the original, you can't really complain when you get enormous backlash from people who respect and cherish it, including a lot of people a lot of people might recognize that there are retrograde elements in it that should be updated, but that doesn't, you could say, yeah, it's incredible. It was the first full-length animated film of all time, and it was a great artistic achievement. There are elements that we're going to update for the modern era, but we are going to respect the original. Only the most batshit conservatives would say anything like that, but that's not what they're saying.
Please clap.